Few academics are as outspoken as Louise Edwards. To use the Australian vernacular, this Chinese scholar calls a spade a bloody shovel.
You know, China's not just Australia's number one trading partner, it's every other country in the world's number one partner too. It's a huge superpower. So Australia needs to get back in the tent.
We've not always agreed, but that's the beauty of thought-provoking discussion. It always makes you think. In America, they've got an unhealthy obsession with cancel culture. Me? I'd rather offer an invitation.
Hi, Tim.
G'day, Louise. Have a seat.
Thank you very much.
Really looking forward to a chat.
Me too.
Looking forward to it for a while. Lots to talk about.
Yeah, it surely is.
I mean, she's got strong opinions, but she doesn't mind being challenged. And I think she's right. I mean, there's too much cancel this, deplatform this person, when basically, if you disagree with someone, you should try and persuade them rather than cancel them.
You'd rather invite them on?
Have them on and get to the nub of what she's thinking. And I was very glad Louise accepted our invitation to speak about the big picture. Ready to go? So welcome to the show, Louise.
Pleasure to be here, Tim.
Now, Australia and China were going so well for such a long time. What are we now? Are we enemies, frenemies? What's gone wrong?
Oh, I think we've just lost the plot in terms of treating our relationship with China as a real international relationship. And it's actually having a negative effect that we're using international relations for short-term political gain, sometimes even short-term electoral gain.
So do you mean by we, do you mean Australia? Do you mean the West? What do you mean by that?
I think Australia is really the one that's making the most mistakes, because we're seeing a lot of other countries around the world managing their relationship with China in a much more sophisticated and strategic way. And our government in the last few years is really struggling to work out a way to do that, to defend Australia's interests while also maintaining a good collaborative and cooperative relationship with the global superpower. And I think it's partly because we're not taking them seriously. And I think that's a really grave mistake for Australia in short term and long term.
Do you think it's just us, or do you think China has changed as well?
I think China's changed, and that's one of the difficulties I think Australian policymakers and Australian leaders have, is that they're not quite prepared for the pace of change. I think we were pretty good about China 5 years ago because China was as it was 5 years ago, but now China has moved on so quickly and it's become so much more of a different type of place, economically, culturally, socially, and we are still thinking we're dealing with China of 5 years ago. And this is fairly evident in terms of the way that we still talk to China as if we're talking down to China. You know, the Chinese no longer have to put up with us patronising them. And when we do patronise them, it just really brings up a whole lot of the old colonial mentality of acting like the colonial overlords who trotted around the world in the 19th and early 20th century.
But we're not a colonial power, we're a bunch of convicts. You know, the UK was looking quite enviously towards Australia in how we managed the relationship. So this can't be something that's overshadowing. It must be something quite different, mustn't it?
I think we were much better and more savvy in our relationships with the world, and especially the Asia Pacific, in the 1990s and early 2000s. We had a sense of Australia as remaking and reconfiguring its place in the world and what it could offer the world. And it was a very courageous and a very creative approach to rethinking how Australia could be in the world. You know, China is now a global superpower. You know, we need to appreciate that as a superpower. Superpowers beat their chests and they will demand to be listened to. I think it's inevitable that China will lecture us because they're a superpower and we're 24 million people who are not the size of a moderate Chinese city, and that we have to actually accept that.
It's worth listening to Louise. This respected author and academic has a long-standing interest in China from many years of study, teaching and writing. What are the things that stand out to you in your career as a China scholar?
I think just the huge diversity of the place. You kind of get bowled over by the sheer diversity of the north and the south and the east and the west, and not only in terms of food and language and culture, but also what people hold dear can be quite varied across different parts of China, and there's different regional interests, and it's really a hugely diverse place. And to rule it, I think, would be a massive challenge. We appreciate maybe that Europe is a complex place to manage for the European Union, but China is as diverse as the European Union is. If we are going to be a strategic player in the relationship with China, we can't keep preparing our populations for only one side of this massive diverse place that is China. And there are very real things we have to be fearful of with China, and there are very real things that we can really benefit from China. But if we keep this idea that they can't be trusted at all, then we're just going to end up not being able to really see what's going on, and we're not listening to what they're actually telling us. I mean, that latest document on common prosperity that was released, there's huge opportunities for Australia in that. Australia is good at lifestyle, right? We actually are probably world leaders in how to manage what we do in our spare time. The Australian population needs to be studying, if you want, the common prosperity thing, like finding out what's there so that we can sort out what are the risks, what are the threats, what are the opportunities, and what can we ignore. I think the big challenges that China sees for the future are they want to move themselves to a zone that is not just producing cheap plastic rubbish. They're moving into AI, robotics, biotech, advanced manufacturing. That's where the real dynamism and the energy for global economic wealth production is going to be, and they're right in that space. So for Australia, really important that we have good partnerships with them in that technology space. And I think that the current relationships with business can be tweaked to accommodate those new shifts.
The big expression, China moving from a nation of shippers to a nation of shoppers, the big, as you say, low-cost exporters is gone. Now it's the growing middle class, the urbanisation, the demand for education and high-value consumer items. Do you think, whatever the political tensions, that's always going to be there for Australia because of the Chinese interest in education and services?
Yeah, but we're not the only player in that market. And I think that's where being the preferred player is the best position to be in, right? We want people to trust our milk products. We want people to trust that they buy Australian beef, it's really good quality beef, and that reputational, advantage, is what we currently have. So we need to make sure that continues on. But the other things that Chinese consumers want, because they could buy Brazilian beef or Argentinian beef or whatever, they've got the money to shop globally. So we want them to come to us. We want them to like our products. And the other thing we've got that is really, I think, part of Australia's genius is this idea of a work-life balance. Now, Australian workers are some of the most productive in the world. They, hourly output is quite amazing for an Australian worker. And yet a lot of people in Asia think Australians are lazy.
It's a myth, isn't it?
Yeah, it's an absolute misperception. I think Australians are very efficient workers. They're not just sitting at their desks watching the clock, waiting for the boss to go home and then go home after the boss. They're actually working hard, working smart, getting out and going for a surf. Working hard, working smart, going out and walking with their kids and playing with their kids.
Work hard, play hard.
Work hard, play hard. This is a part of the genius of Australia. And we have town planners that embed these kinds of opportunities in our cities. We allow our schools to be used during weekends and when school's out by ordinary people, ordinary citizens. That openness to recreation is a huge money spinner for Australia. It's a big part of the Australian economy, and it can be a big part of the Chinese economy. Leisure exports. Healthy living, this kind of stuff, Australians are really good at.
As an expert on women and gender in China, Louise has views that demand to be heard. Do you think that when people look at China, they underestimate the role of women in China? Because we've interviewed a lot of female entrepreneurs, you know, very significant business leaders and civic leaders, but is there some paradox in terms of politics and the economy?
Yeah, I think there is, and I think it's partly because there's been such a strong sense of family business in China, and women are central to families, so that's where they get their status, and there also hasn't been that prejudice about women can't do maths that many of us labour under here. There hasn't been that sense that, women can't count, because women were always good business managers, and often they were the ones who held the purse strings. You know, some of your viewers might remember walking into Chinese restaurants all around the world, and the person sitting behind the till is a woman. You know, and that's
usually,
not and that's not an accident. That's not because she's cute. It's because she can really do the maths, and she can be trusted with that core financial aspect of the business. So we're way behind on this in Australia, and we could learn a lot from watching Chinese business women as they operate around the world. And the same could be said for showcasing Australian multiculturalism more. You know, we don't have enough diversity in the people representing Australia internationally yet. We still look a bit more like, we've got women in there and men in there, but we tend to be white people there.
When I take my MBA classes to China and Japan and Korea, I mean, we have 60-odd nationalities in our class. That's sort of pretty normal.
Wow.
So I wouldn't say that would be necessarily a surprise when people think about Australia. They're quite used to it. And if you go to the Chambers of Commerce, at Austrade, we had the highest proportion of Asian language speakers, of any government agency. So this is all sort of happening, isn't it?
I don't know. It still seems to be the case that what is held up as Australian is still the home and away model of a blonde person who is representing Australia. And Australia is so different from that. There is so much diversity here, so much talent and international savvy that we have among our population that are not white, and that could really advance Australia's cause all through Asia. We could present ourselves as a country that shares power with the really diverse range of migrants that come here, as well as with the Indigenous people. That's why I think it's really good if we can showcase the fabulous achievements we've made, and that I think would help. That would help lift Australia's reputation again. And I think that comes from really hard work on the part of everybody to adjust to each other, but it's also come from really good policy from Canberra. Driving multiculturalism and not letting it slip. I think that's been a real success story for Australia, and I think we can export that more. We can manifest that more in Asia, and that'll sort of allay some of the concerns that Australia is just a deputy dog or a remnant of a colonial power.
Great, Louise. Thanks for your time.
That's all right. Lovely to be here.
All right, we've come to the end of the series. Your final observation, what is the big picture in our relationship between Australia and China?
My big concern with China and Australia is that there are some dominant voices. In the red corner, there are sort of business people that say, whatever you do, don't upset China and just give up your national sovereignty. In the blue corner, there's people that just fear the rise of China and are completely unrealistic about the economic ties with China. So I think you should have a nuanced view where you know that China's a major player in the world. You know that a lot of Australian prosperity depends on China. So you muddle through knowing that you've got to manage these different interests. But I'm actually optimistic because there's enough people of goodwill. A lot of the people that we've interviewed on this program show that there's a way forward. What an array of talent we've had over this series. Prime Ministers, educators, entrepreneurs and risk takers. Business leaders, scientists, master craftsmen and monks. Each bringing their own unique and considered view, each bringing their own wisdom. Not always in agreement, but always focused on the big picture.
You cannot ignore the Chinese economy. You need to embrace the opportunities while being fully mindful of the risks, hence why I've emphasised the importance of diversification.
I don't think there's any doubt there's going to be areas which are of mutual benefit, many areas of mutual benefit between Australia and China, Australia and Singapore, Australia and India. Now, there are areas in health, in medicine, in technology areas in which it's in our joint interests to collaborate as closely as we can with the proper checks and balances in place. I mean, I've been very heavily involved in relationships with China in recent years around complementary medicine and integrative health. Now, this is an area where I can only see mutual benefit.
If you can just capture the heart of, 1, 2, 3, 100 people, the impact that can then go on and have is exponential. Whereas in Australia, you might have an impact with 1 or 2. They might tell their friend, but they might not. So that's why you need to hit so many more people. Whereas here, you've just got this incredible leverage. When someone loves your product, they're going to tell everyone about it.
What you can't do is you can't sit here in Australia and kind of do it remotely. That'll be a fail.
A big fail?
I would say a big fail. You need to be, if you want to be successful in China, you need to be in China.
You need to understand the culture, you need to understand the people you're working with, you need to have some money behind you and a budget to make it work, and don't give up.
As long as you're prepared to give it a crack, in our terminology.
It's a great expression.
Give it a crack, get in there, roll your sleeves up.
Just have fun, always strive for the best.
Eat what they are eating, drink what they are eating, and sort of try and understand where they're coming from culturally, because it's different to where we come from culturally.
Doing business well or successfully, you do need to know the country, you do need to know the culture. So you know how to actually negotiate and how to mediate.
We've had many bumpy periods over the last 50 years, and I would expect that there will be more tensions and bumpy roads ahead of us. But that shouldn't stop us from trying to ensure that we have the best possible relationship that we can have. Politicians come and go, governments come and go. Individuals and personal relationships and many business relationships will last, much longer than that.